The offensive cross. The cross is quite offensive to many. I want us to begin by thinking about something that happened a good 1100 years before the cross. Many of you may remember Jephthah. He's very famous for the vow he made concerning his daughter in the book of Judges. But in that story as well, we find he goes out to battle. He's leading the Gileadites, and they win their battle. They're victorious. Well, after they win the battle and they are dividing the spoils, some of the Ephraimites want to come get the spoils. They didn't want to join in the war. He invited them to, come fight with us. They didn't do that, but then when they won, then they wanted to come over the river and share in the spoils of war. Well, the Gileadites killed many of them. And so the Ephraimites decided they better go back home. And they fled back to go back across the river. But Jephthah and his men weren't going to let that go. So they stopped everyone that was trying to cross the river at the fords of the river. And everyone that was coming across, they would ask them a question. The Hebrew word for flood is shibboleth. But an interesting thing, I don't know if it was just a dialect or if it was some sort of a genetic issue. Those from Ephraim couldn't say shibboleth. They said sibboleth for whatever reason. They pronounced it differently. And so I guess it's kind of like, I've never been able to speak Spanish because I can't roll my R's. About the closest I can come is it just doesn't work right. They'd have that big commercial, ruffles have ridges. I could never do it. Never been able to do that. And so maybe these Ephraimites just had, maybe they were tongue-tied or something or what, but they could not say shibboleth the way the Gileadites said it. And so the Gileadites blocked the rivers, and as the Ephraimites were trying to get across, they would say, Are you from Ephraim? And they said, Well, oh no, I'm not from Ephraim. Okay, well, say shibboleth. Couldn't say it. They said sibboleth, and they'd know. You're from Ephraim. I guess if you were from Gilead and you had a speech impediment where you couldn't say shibboleth and it could only say sibboleth, you better not try to cross the river. You're in trouble. But they wound up killing all of them that tried to cross back over the river. Jephthah and the flood. You heard about Noah and the flood, but not Jephthah and the flood, perhaps. That is, that Hebrew word for flood is what he used to divide between those that were loyal to him and those who were not. Now, what does that have to do with the cross being offensive to people? Well, the fact is, like Jephthah, the cross allows no middle ground. The cross doesn't allow us to be ambivalent. There are a lot of people who want to take that middle ground. They want to say, well, Jesus was a good man. No, not a possibility. Either he was the Son of God like he claimed, or he was not a good man. Because a good man wouldn't claim to be something he's not and deceive people in that way. The cross provokes people to take a strong stand one way or the other. One of the elders in the first church where I preached after I graduated from college, He used to always say, the cross will either draw you or drive you. It's either going to pull you toward Christ or it's going to push you away. Because that cross is offensive. Or it's beautiful and captivating. You can't really look at the cross and be non-committal one way or the other. Now, you can choose either one. And a lot of people just never look at the cross because they don't want to have to make that choice. But the cross doesn't allow you to take the middle road. To think about the cross as that shibboleth, as that thing that divides those that are loyal from those who are disloyal. Let's consider 1 Corinthians 1 and verses 18 through 24. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise man? Where is the scholar? Where is the philosopher of this age? Hasn't God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world, through its wisdom, did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. The Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks, the Gentiles, look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Paul makes it very clear that the cross is the dividing line. A lot of people might read some of the teachings of Christ and they might say, yeah, he said some smart things. Yeah, he was really revolutionary in the way that he looked at things. And he really got people to examine themselves and to examine the culture they lived in. But that wasn't what he was here to do. And he certainly did that. But he himself, talking about his own coming death, said to the disciples, shall I say, Father, spare me from this hour? No, it is for this hour that I came to earth. That's why he was here. Did he teach? Yes. Did he prophesy? Yes. Did he heal and do miracles? Yes. But the reason he was here to do all those things was to get to the cross. All of those things were just part of the process. We need to ask ourselves the question, how do we pronounce C-R-O-S-S? I said, well, that's an easy word. That's cross. Yeah, but how do we really pronounce it with our lives? How do we say that word in our actions? Paul says there are some who call it foolishness. Some pronounce that word the stupidity of God, letting his own son die on the cross. Why would you do that? What's wrong with you? What were you thinking? Others Call it a stumbling block. God can't die. God wouldn't send his son to die. Why God wouldn't do that. But there are still others who pronounce it the power and wisdom of God. Have you ever been in a situation with someone who did something that looking on, you're watching them do it, and you're thinking, this is foolish, this is ridiculous, this is bad, you don't do it that way, and then what they were doing worked. How did that? I never would have thought that can't. How did that work? That can't do that. See, sometimes when somebody's a lot smarter than us, they know things about things that we don't know. They got something figured out that we couldn't figure out. And that's kind of the way it is with the cross and God. He had this all figured out a long time ago. We look at it and think, well, how's him dying on the cross? How's that going to accomplish anything? What good is that going to do? Why would you do that? You let Satan beat him. That's foolish. Why would you do that? But God knew. He had a plan all along. I don't know exactly how all the tiebreakers and things work here in Georgia with high school football. But I do know how it worked years ago in Mississippi. I went to high school in Mississippi, believe it or not. So I know how that worked then. There was a situation where it was the last game of the season, and the coach of the home team, they were leading by 2 points with just a few seconds left in the game. They were going to win the game. Last game of the season. Going to have a winning record. Everything looked great. The fans, they're all like, and they had the ball. All they had to do was just kneel, run out the rest of the clock, and the game's over, and they win. Fans, already starting to get ready, get going toward the gate so they can beat the traffic out of the parking lot. If you've ever been to a sporting event, you know how much you want to do that. But the strangest thing happened. Coach sent the play in. They started the play, and the quarterback took the ball, and instead of kneeling, he ran out of the back of his own end zone and gave the opposing team 2 points and tied the game and sent it into overtime. What's wrong with you? What are you thinking? You did it. That's the wrong. Why would you do that? Well, fortunately for that coach, it wound up working out. They, in overtime, managed to score a touchdown, won the game by 6 points. What the coach knew that none of the fans and parents and players even necessarily understood or knew was that the tiebreakers for who got to go to the playoffs was based not only on victories, but on how many points you won by. Their opponent, the other team that they were neck and neck with to get that final playoff spot, had already won their game by that time and had won it, and he had done the math, and he knew they could win the game by 2 points and stay home from the playoffs, or they could do the risky thing, take the chance even that they might lose that game in overtime, but take the chance of winning it by 6 points and making it to the playoffs, because the other team was 4 points ahead of them in the tiebreaker. Winning by 2 points wasn't good enough. He knew that. The others didn't. And so they saw what he was doing as something foolish. But it was actually wisdom. It was actually the smartest move. It was the move that gave his team the chance to go to the playoffs. So many times when people look at what God did with sending Christ to earth, with the cross and letting Christ die, they don't realize God was doing what was necessary. God could have stayed in heaven. Christ could have stayed in heaven. They could have been happy all alone for eternity there without any of us. But Christ said, and God said, that's not good enough. And so they took what appeared to be a foolish risk. It really wasn't a risk at all, because God's God, right? There was never any risk. There was never any danger of it failing. Unlike the football coach in our story, who, I mean, it could have failed and they could have lost, and of course then he'd have probably lost his job, right? That's the way that works. But there was never any chance of God failing. His plan worked out exactly as it was supposed to. But when Christ is dying on that cross, just like when the quarterback runs out the back of the end zone, everybody is looking at that thinking this is the wrong thing to do. Foolishness, stumbling block. No, not at all. The power and wisdom of God. Now, this is the thing that we have to proclaim to the world. And the problem is the world doesn't always listen. Paul, in making his defense before Festus and Agrippa, Festus, even when he hears what Paul is preaching, he said, "You are out of your mind. You're crazy. Not just this isn't a good idea, but you are insane for thinking this way." Paul, of course, had to say, "No, I'm not. Not at all." In Galatians 5:11, Paul says that the preaching of the cross causes offense to many. But that's okay. Because again, it, like that shibboleth at the river, is designed to be the thing that makes you choose. Accept the cross or reject the cross. You can't have Christ without it. You can't have salvation without it. There's no other way. As we consider the way that the world reacts to the cross, we've all seen some of the ways that the world reacts to the cross. The Gentiles, the Greeks. The Greek of ancient times is like the American of today. So wise in our own eyes. Got it all figured out. Smartest in the world. American exceptionalism. You think the Greeks didn't feel the same way? Greek exceptionalism. You know how great the Greeks were? They were conquered by the Romans, but guess what? The Romans spoke Greek. They learned to speak Greek. How do you manage to get the people who conquer you to accept your culture and your language? The Greeks were, they were great. I mean, Greek architecture, everybody still admires the Greeks thousands of years later. They're what America thinks of themselves and how most Americans, we're the best. We're the smartest, we're the best, we're the greatest. They were looking for wisdom, wise people, scholars and philosophers. When they looked at the cross, all they found was foolishness. And honestly, that's the way a lot of Americans today are going to look at it. More and more, it seems. Saw a study done recently showing that of those in the millennial and Generation X age groups, 29% consider themselves irreligious, agnostic, or atheist. Almost a third of that entire group. They would see the cross as something foolish. Even a lot of people who are religious people still see it that way, even though they may not be secular and completely in their mindset. They still don't see the reason for the cross. You see, the cross is offensive to the natural man because he believes he has, or at least he can figure out, all the answers. Humanism, we call that sometimes. We figure it out for ourselves. Man is evolving. We're getting wiser and smarter and so on and so forth. I don't know. I've looked around. I haven't seen a lot of that wiser and smarter stuff. Look around. Oh, we're making some technological advancements and different things like that. But it seems to me like along the way, we're getting more foolish. We're getting dumber. We're trusting calculators, phones, computers, everything to do all the things for us. And we can't even figure anything out for ourselves hardly anymore without one of them. We're not really evolving to a higher plane. We're not getting better and figuring out the answers, solving the problems. Really? What problems have we solved? Diseases still cause death. We're still in wars almost constantly over something somewhere in the world. We haven't solved the problems. A lot of the social problems, jails are filling up faster in some places than we can build them because of crime. We haven't solved the social problem. We hadn't figured out the answers. Far from it. But that's the way that mankind looks at himself. We're getting wiser. We're figuring it out. We're becoming better. We're evolving. We're growing. But you see, the cross proclaims loudly that salvation, the solution to man's problems, does not lie in man's ingenuity. You're not going to get it figured out on your own. What 1 Corinthians 1, 20 and 21 that we looked at a little bit ago says. It's man's arrogance that makes him think he can figure it out and solve the problems. But the cross says, no, you can't. You are not the solution. You're part of the problem. That's what the cross tells us. And we don't like to hear that. I mean, do you like to hear you're part of the problem? I don't like to hear I'm part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. Problem is, none of us are part of the solution. We're not figuring it out. We're not helping make it better. We're helping make it worse. We needed a Savior. We needed the cross. We didn't like it. Then the cross affects the religious in different ways. You know, the Jews, he mentions the Jews and the Greeks. The Jews of the first century, these are the religious people. They were religionists who believed that heaven is coming because they're so deserving, that they get salvation by doing enough good works, by obeying enough, by serving God the right way. It'll make him happy and he'll owe us salvation. I haven't found a lot of people who will express it that way. I've run across one or two. Well, if I do what God says, then He owes me heaven. Well, I've heard one or two, I've met a couple of people that said that. Most of us would, oh, well, no. But you know what? Regardless of what we say, sometimes we're tempted to live that way, that like, if I can just get this right, then God will have to save me. That's not the way that works. The Jews were looking for some sort of a miraculous sign. Jesus said, I'm going to give you a sign, and this is the only one you're going to get. Just like Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, the Son of Man's going to be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. He's going to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. They didn't understand the sign. Even when the sign came, the vast majority of them didn't. You know, we talk sometimes about, oh, the day of Pentecost, 3,000. Did you know the estimates are, Josephus estimated that 500,000 to 1,000,000 Jews would be in Jerusalem at Pentecost. 500,000 to 1,000,000. And we're really excited because 3,000 were Christians. 3,000 came to the cross. 3,000 out of 500,000? That's not even 1%, folks. I know it sounds like a big number because, when we look around, we're like, well, if we had 3,000 people, wow. But it was less than 1% of the people that were there who thought they were following God, who should have been excited to hear a message that said God has brought salvation to you. And now certainly it did spread beyond that 3,000. There were more later. Some estimates say that the church fairly quickly grew to 25,000 in Jerusalem. Well, now you've got up to about 5%. 5% of God's chosen people. That's not great odds either, is it? Yeah, the idea that we'll do all the things and we'll get all the rituals right, and God will just have to save us. See, the cross is offensive to the religious person because he believes deep down in his heart, so many times, even if he won't say it, he really believes that salvation lies in his own goodness. How many times, when you talk to somebody about heaven or about Christianity or about the Bible or about Jesus, how many times have you heard somebody say, but I'm a good person? There it is. Everyone who says, I'm a good person, is trying to save themselves by their goodness. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to be good people. But we need to realize being a good person, even if you're the best person in the world, imagine, if you will, a person who lives their entire life and only sins once. One time. That is hard to imagine, isn't it? Not one time a day, not one time a week, but their whole life. They only sin one time. Say that's a good person? Oh, that is the best. Well, guess what? Without the cross, that person is just as lost as everybody else. It's not our goodness that saves us. Now, does God want us to be good? Does Christ want us to be good? Yes. The Bible tells us that we are created in Christ Jesus to do good works. But God's not saving us because we're good. See, the Jew and the Greek both end up believing the same thing. They both end up believing in man perfecting man, man saving man making himself right. You see, if we could have made ourselves right, if we could have saved ourselves, God could have just sent some instructions, and He didn't need to send a Savior. He didn't need to send Christ to die on the cross if we could figure it out and do it ourselves. But both the wisdom of the Greeks and Gentiles and also the law of Moses showed you can't do it yourself. You can't keep the law well enough. You can't, of your own wisdom, figure it all out. It just doesn't work. See, the message of the cross is that salvation does not lie in man's goodness. As we conclude, I want to ask us the question, have you ever felt the offense of the cross? Have you ever come face to face with the cross and realized exactly where you stand and had to make that choice? Am I going to accept who I am and what the cross means to me, or am I going to reject the cross and keep trying to do it my own way? Have you ever been there? The Bible talks about Christ as a stone. And it says that everyone who falls on this stone will be broken. If we will fall on Christ, it will break us. It will break our will for His will. It will break our pride for His humility. It will break us. But then it goes on to say, on whomever the stone falls, it will crush him to powder, to dust. See, we've got that choice. We can come to Christ. We can fall on Him. We can break ourselves upon Him. Or we can stubbornly defy Him and He will fall on us. He'll crush us to dust. Consider the cross and boasting. Many are offended at the cross. But instead of being offended, we need to be boasting in the cross and never boasting about anything else. When we tell others that we are saved, we shouldn't be talking about how, well, I learned this and I got better and and this and that. No, when we tell others we're saved, we need to talk about, I was hopeless and Jesus brought me hope. Jesus saved me. Not I did this and I did. Jesus saved me. The cross saved me. That doesn't reject that we need to do what He said. Sometimes we get so defensive. If somebody says we're saved by grace, well, yeah, but we got to have works and we got to do this and we got to obey. And yes, saying we're saved by grace doesn't negate our faith. It doesn't negate the obedience to God's commands. It should be the thing that generates them. The cross should be the thing that compels us to serve God and to be obedient to Him. But if we're going to boast about something, I'm going to boast about, well, I'll go to church all the time. Boast about the cross. That's what we need to boast about. The cross is the symbol of man's failure. It's also the sign of God's love. The cross is proof of man's helplessness. but it's also the essence of God's saving power. And because of the cross, we can boast that the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than men's strength. Are you relying on your own strength? Or are you ready to quit playing that foolish game and come to Him and let Him, in His power, with His wisdom, save you and mold you and mend you and prepare you to be what He wants you to be? You can't do it alone. None of us can. He can. It's His power. It's His wisdom. Or are you going to be like those who just can't pronounce the cross properly? Don't do that. Come to the cross. Pronounce it the power and wisdom of God, and submit yourself to everything that He calls for you to do and to be. If you have a need to respond to God's invitation this morning, for whatever reason, please do so as we stand and sing.